Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on this edition of the program. I am Imonia Marere. The 37th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Governments of the African Union, AU, ended on Sunday in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The two-day summit of African leaders was focused on the theme of building resilient education systems for development, one of the key goals of the Continental Body's developmental blueprint, Agenda 2063. It sought to put a spotlight on how to enhance education and skills to meet Africa's vision, market needs, and prospects of overall development. Deliberations during the two-day summit, which were preceded by the usual ministerial preparatory meetings, were arguably overshadowed by the challenges of instability, insecurity, poverty, deficits in economic governance, climate change, peace, and the marginalization of women and youths in development and leadership processes. The leaders acknowledged these challenges in their various speeches and presentations at the opening session. Now, the African Union was built on the mantra of, and I quote, an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the global arena, end of quote. It went on to adopt Agenda 2063 in January 2015, a blueprint to achieve inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development over a 50-year period. Several decades after its founding, it appears that rather than making the desired integrative progress, the continent is being overwhelmed by its many challenges, including wars, resurgence of military coups, pre- and post-election violence, terrorism and violent extremism, humanitarian crises, and the collapse of institutions of regional and continental governance, such as the ECOWAS, the East African Community EAC, and other regional economic blocs. So, what has gone wrong? Why is Africa unable to find its feet amongst the Committee of Nations? How much progress has been made in socio-economic and infrastructure integration to fast-track the realization of key development ambitions on the continent? Why is Africa not able to push and promote a common position on the global arena? Has the African Union itself underperformed its purpose and goals? How relevant and responsive is the organization to today's challenges in Africa? These are the issues that we will be taking a look at as we do a post-mortem of the 37th Ordinary Session of the AU Heads of State and Government Summit just ended in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We'll be back in a moment with our guest, and we'll be looking at all of this. Stay with us.
The Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
All right, let's get to meet our guests. We're joined by Professor Imam Mukhtar. Professor Mukhtar is a professor of political science and international relations at Al-Muhiba Open University in Abuja and Director Center for Middle East and North African Studies here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you so much, Professor Imam Mukhtar, for finding time to join us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, we're also joined virtually by Ambassador Humphrey Ojako. Ambassador Ojako is Nigeria's former permanent representative to the United Nations office in Geneva, amongst many other diplomatic postings which he held while he was in service. Ambassador Ojako, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. And right here in the studio, we're joined by Mr. Vitus Okonkwo, who is a governance and policy analyst. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So let's begin this way. Ambassador Ojako, let's have your take on the 37th session, summit of the AU. What would you say your takeaways are from that summit?
Thank you so much again for bringing me into this program today. The African conundrum has not really changed much. It has always been that problem that arose immediately after the continent seemed to have overcome the problem, that's the political problems of colonialism, of liberating the still colonized countries of Southern Africa, removing apartheid, discriminatory rule in South Africa itself. After that era of very robust and focused diplomacy, the African Union was recreated from Organization of African Unity to the African Union. This time, the emphasis and top priority was supposed to be rebuilding Africa's economies and reintegrating Africa to the rest of the international community as an equal and relevant player in global affairs, and not just a passenger or a free ride and all of that. Your question should revolve on this second aspect of that assignment. How far has Africa come? Probably that is the same, the 77th session has virtually the same theme as the 76th and the 75th. It's all about peace and security, stability of the African continent. It's all about prosperity, development, removal of poverty, integration of the regional bodies, and so on, to work in synergy to take Africa forward. I heard you mention the Agenda 2063. To my mind, that is the focal point of what it is the African Union has achieved since the end of apartheid and South Africa joining the African Union. That Agenda 2063, with its flagship agenda, with its flagship project, which is AFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, was supposed, and this was entered since 2013. Since 2013, it was supposed to be a 50-year agenda, which will now propel, when fully implemented, will propel Africa into becoming not just a mere player, but an equal and relevant participant in global affairs. But look at where we are today. We are still talking about coups and counter-coups. We are still talking about the elementary aspects of entrenching democracy or democratic practices in our countries. We are still talking of wars, civil wars in the Congo DRC that started since the 1960s, in the Sudan, and so on. So if you ask me to that extent, has the AU achieved this objective? I'll probably say no. But if you ask me if it has ideas which require a lot of political will and commitment on the part of its leaders to now go forward and say, yes, Africa is ready to go, I will say yes, we have achieved that in Agenda 2063. Thank you.
All right, let me bring in Professor Imam Mukhtar now. Some will argue, Prof, that between when the OAU transformed into AU and now, there appear to be more crises, more instability on the continent than there was before its metamorphosis into the AU. What do you think is responsible for that?
Well, thank you once again. The reality is that the crisis we're witnessing is a global phenomenon. It's not just an African issue. Whether it is economic crisis, we see that the world is facing a serious financial crisis at the moment. There's a slowdown in virtually all economies. When you talk about wars and civil strife and conflicts, obviously it's virtually all over the world. Yes, we have our peculiarities. There's no doubt to that. And the reality is that, like you rightly mentioned, from the transformation of the OAU into AU, the gap is basically very apparent that we have witnessed more civil strikes, we have witnessed more instability, politically and otherwise, across the African continent. There's no question about that. Part of the reasons that are responsible for this crisis that we're witnessing, whether they be in the form of military resurgences or rather the incursion of the military into politics, which is basically the resurgence of military coups, or it is civil strikes in various parts of the continent, the DRC, for example, crisis in Somalia, for example, the recent crisis in Sudan and in Mali and in Burkina Faso, and these other places. The reality is the question is, or the underlying or the underpinning issues are the same. It's always been about resources. The reality is the Pan-Africanist ideal for which or upon which the founding fathers set up these international regimes, such as the AU and ECOWAS, for example, have not really been adhered to. And most of these goals haven't been achieved. And it creates room for a lot of rancor, for a lot of dissent voices, for a lot of resentment and so on and so forth. And so all of these things have snowballed and metamorphosed into our today. Resource nationalism is at the core of this. Beyond just the ideals of Pan-Africanism, there's also the question of resource nationalism. The reality is people are not really concerned about the face of government or whatever label you give the system of government or governance. The primacy for ordinary citizen is about having the access to good life, is about having the dividends of leadership and governance, manifest in their lives. And where these things are not prevalent, the reality is that it creates room for all kinds of voices to be thrown up. Of course, as we will all agree, just as the frustration aggression theory postulates, frustration naturally leads to aggression. And where people find themselves being alienated from a natural environment in which they belong, the natural response to that will be to see crisis and conflict situation. And of course, these are part of the reasons why we're witnessing some of the crises that we're witnessing today. Collapse of governments, legitimate governments across the African continent is one of the reasons. The fall of Muammar Gaddafi regime, for example, in Libya, led to the flooding of the sub-Saharan African region into West Africa with weapons. As we speak, there are close to over 500 million small and light weapons from the period of the fall of the Gaddafi era till today. And these weapons have found their way through the sub-Saharan Africa as a result of the ungoverned spaces within the Sahel. And of course, they have found themselves, these weapons have found their way into the hands of Arabic groups like Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and the Tuareg, and so on and so forth. So it's a complex whole. When you look at all of these are multi-layered, multi-dimensional, and multifaceted issues that have all culminated to create the kind of situation that we're witnessing today. And of course, this can be said about the economic crisis as well, and also of the social issues which are currently experiencing across the Africa.
All right, let's bring in Mr. Vitus Okonkwo here. From a governance point of view, do you agree with those who argue, for instance, that the AU, much like perhaps the United Nations, has simply become a talk shop and that it cannot bite it can back, but may not be able to back?
Yeah, elementarily, it could be better agreed or better say that the AU posture can be better linked to the balance of water everywhere, no water to drink. Africa blessed with milk and honey, so much endowed. But the leadership issues has brought African Union to what it is today. When you look at the historical journey of the African Union, you will find out that most African presidents and African nations and the blocs prefer more about their foreign agreements and foreign partners more than their internal cohesion and integration of African nations. You look at it through the trade angle, you will find out that most African nations have ceded out their raw materials to be taken away than to be refined internally, create jobs, and spread distribution within the African region and blocks, and service themselves and become viable economically. Generally, if you break it down, you find out from the north to the southern to the West Africa. That will tell you why that even in West Africa, you find out that the largest oil-producing country like Nigeria up to today cannot vouch of a performing refinery. The same Nigeria have spent more than the cost of building 20 refineries in the cost of shipping crude oil outside Nigeria, refining them and bringing back only petrol, diesel, and jet air one. The other components have gone into unknown place, and the nation has remained what it is. The African Union have refused to see Africa as their center core for their political development, economic development, and otherwise. So when people say that the African Union are more or less water everywhere, no water to drink, I seem to believe them. And is there any way forward? Yes, that's hope. If you look at the historical performance so far, index performance so far of the African Union, track it down towards the blocks, you will find out that the southern blocks, South African blocks, have been able to create a kind of trade route where they build road and sea routes that transcend between Namibia and other countries to South Africa.
That's the SADC community.
Yes, community. And that particular agenda should be appreciated, because automatically you find that Namibia produce more of agricultural product and lack other essential goods. By the time a truck load in Namibia, load vegetables in Namibia, moving to South Africa, the truck will come back with other products produced in South Africa. So you see Africa servicing itself, which is the reason for such integration and trade value that can be enjoyed. How much more can we do? If you look at the North Africa, you find out the railway, the belt, across the ring nations of North Africa, which has produced a kind of situation where trades and goods and services can be transported across nations and building the economic strength of these African nations. Yeah, that has been done. Onto the West African region, we have the ECOWAS passport, which I can hardly confess to how much more the 15 African nations have obeyed that African ECOWAS passport when you travel to most of these African countries. Some still need visas to enter, which without them knowing that the importance and import of this gathering, the African Union, is to make sure we enjoy the variable advantage of our brotherhood and strengthen it with that mutual coexistence and mutual cooperations in terms of our political will, in terms of economic exchange, in terms of all that intends to build African Union strong. But we lack all those things. Having said all these few places that we have seen positive strength, I think we need to improve on them. We need to look at the real challenges of the African Union.
We'll come back to those challenges and what you think would be the way out. But let me get back to Ambassador Ojako, and let's ask the very hard questions here, Ambassador. And this has to do with the fact that in 2015, Agenda 2063 came on board, and that agenda was aimed at achieving where it was supposed to be a blueprint at achieving inclusive and sustainable economic development over a 50-year period. Between 2015 and now, almost 10 years gone, what can we point at as some of those achievements of the first 10 years of this Agenda 2063?
Thank you again for bringing me to the conversation. In fact, I agree absolutely with my co-discussants on the issues they have raised concerning the stagnation of the continent and this causes leadership and all the emerging issues. But I started with emphasizing that the only major achievement, in my view, of the African Union in the past couple of decades since the end of apartheid, when we now veered away, we pivoted from political issues towards the economic growth and development of the African continent. But there is an underlying factor here. A brilliant idea, Agenda 2063 is very brilliant, very expansively discussed, highly researched. And its progress was supposed to be captured and encapsulated in the activities of ACTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, what is going on? Take a look at African growth and development initiatives. There is one undercurrent. There's one factor that runs through all of them. There is a certain dependency on exogenous contributions to
Well, we appear to have lost signals from Ambassador Ojako there. But we hope that we are going to get back to him very quickly. Yes, okay, he's back.
Of following African issues as a diplomat. That is the only one that seemed to emphasize that the growth and development of Africa has to be essentially an African-driven program. Africa and this diaspora people, is that happening? Dependency. If you listen to the discourse in our own Nigeria today, you will hear diplomats and diplomatists and politicians who are in the know. They are talking more about joining BRICS, about joining other extracontinental organizations that are pursuing growth. And that element of thinking that others, outsiders, are in the business of international relations to do Africa a favor still runs deep. It still runs deep in the mentality of Africa's leadership. Agenda 2063 and ACTA insists that each country in the African continent would have to join into a continental African economic industrial hub through its regional, its sub-regional organizations. West Africa, ECOWAS, Southern Africa, SADC, the Maghreb region, and the rest of that. Take a look at what is happening in ECOWAS itself. There is this emphasis on the political that detracts from the economic focus that this thing should take to grow and succeed. Because as one of my fellow discussers said here, I think I heard him very clearly, if people are hungry, please don't start talking democracy and these highfalutin principles to them. You have to ensure that these irritants like hunger that arouses anger in the population, such things should be taken care of first. Such things as stability of your own country as it dovetails into the regional stability, security, all of that. I had one of our companies talking about all these terrorist and sub-terrorist organizations and agencies penetrating the West African sub-region and destabilizing things. A similar thing is happening in the East, the Horn of Africa, and so on. So these are not the elements that would lead to joining a continental development project as big, ambitious, and actually wise as AFTA through a sub-regional organization. So there is a lot of work for countries like Nigeria to do on ECOWAS. I don't think that is happening. There is a lot of work to be done at the continental level to ensure inter-sub-regional coordination and activities kind of reinforcing each other. That was the avenue for Nigeria to produce goods. It goes into the West African submarket, from the West African submarket into Central Africa, into North Africa, and vice versa. That was the idea. This needs a lot of infrastructural investments and projects. Why are they happening? Now, with these conflicts, today, ECOWAS, Mali, Niger Republic, Burkina Faso, I won't be totally surprised if at some point Guinea joins them to say, no, we are separating from this sub-regional organization. Take a look at that gas pipeline project to take Nigerian gas and from West Africa to Europe and so on. This is a great opportunity that could employ millions of young people who are crossing the Sahara Desert to go and die at Lampedusa, you know? But it is not happening because of these conflicts. So that is why the AU may be right to say, listen, all these issues of insecurity in the continent have to be contained. Let us focus on sub-regional growth and development, strengthening sub-regional integration as the entry into the African continental integration, which the AU, as the success of the OAU, that has been the original idea of Pan-Africanism from 1963 when the OAU was founded by very visionary African leaders. Is that vision still there today? Yes, the vision is there. But is the leadership to carry it through? Is it available at the moment? Honestly, let's be frank, I don't see it. Because if a country like Nigeria is not prioritizing AFTA and these activities, in fact, if you take a look at the United Nations studies, even World Bank studies on what AFTA could mean to Africa, if diligently implemented in the next 10 years, it will surpass by far. So in fact, it will take over the Asian region in terms of intracontinental trade. It will reduce by almost 70% our dependency on products and processes from other regions of the world. But that is not happening because countries like Nigeria that should place emphasis on ensuring that AFTA becomes a reality are focusing more on this talk about joining BRICS, replacing the dollar as a currency of international business and so on. I don't think that should be our priority. Unfortunately, that's what we hear in government.
All right, flowing from that, Professor Mukhtar, let's take off from where Ambassador stopped now, and that's having to talk about the sub-regional bodies, and the fact that the argument has been made that the sub-regional bodies appear to be in decline, except for one or two, and they are key to the cohesiveness of the African Union itself. Now, how much impact does the decline of these sub-regional bodies likely to have on how well the AU is able to marshal out its blueprint and ensure that there is this sustainable and resilience in terms of provision of infrastructure and other resources that are needed for a more prosperous Africa? Professor Mukhtar, we hope that is able to rejoin us, but let me direct that question to you, Mr. Konkwa.
Yes. Well, the importance of the sub-regional bodies are very key towards achieving the African national integration in terms of economic integration, political welfare, and having the strength to compete with other bodies in the world. Like Professor rightly said, you find out that the intention of the African Union are germane, very important, which unites us in terms of building a stronger body, which we will now enjoy the variables at which that we lose, gallivanting outside our frontiers, spending so much and bringing pressure in our resources and in our forests and all that, because we are not looking inward in terms of solving the African problems. When we look at the African free trade, you find out that the situation you will have Africa concentrate their production and their market. Nigeria in particular become a very important bride. With over 200 million population, you find out that the market is there. With our huge natural resources and minerals in Nigeria, the oil and the gas and all variable minerals, you find out that Nigeria is a big market. With the youthful demography that we have today, you find out that in the whole Africa, Nigeria has the best youthful demography. You find out that the youth work is there that can speed up production, and Nigeria and Africa will be a better place. They are there. Then you ask, how much more is our leadership in the past and currently looking into taking advantage of this strength than our weaknesses? You will find out that the Africans do not patronize the Africans. We patronize our regional, our international and foreign partners and foreign agreements, which I stated earlier. The time has come when Nigeria in particular will take advantage of the fact, looking at the fact that the African, they call us giant of Africa. It is not a mere statement to say that we are giant of Africa. We are giant of Africa because nature and God has presented us to be blessed with a multicultural, multi-religion, high population, blessed with natural resources, the oil, the gas, and many minerals. So the strength of Nigeria in the African Union to take advantage of this huge population and centralize it into building a stronger market that can service Africa become the strength at which the A Union seek. You will find out that Mauritania is about 4.2 million in population and the country in the African Union. Nigeria is 200 and something million, which is how many tons of Mauritania. So if Nigeria in particular will take a center stage in terms of building that cohesion, building that internal African to African trade, taking advantage of the African trade zone, giving production a space that Nigerian product will be sold into our neighbors in Africa and across our neighbors in Africa, that will not only create jobs, that will create economic value and reduce the pressure we have in our naira today. That Nigeria should take up the center stage to look at herself and ask, how much have we failed? Is it not shameful today for me to note that from the point that Nigerian refineries were built to when it was built up to now, that I am aware on records that Nigeria has spent money that can build 10 brand new refineries on transporting our crude from this, our mining nation, African blessed rich oil, to nations that the cost of transportation and the cost of dollar difference and the cost of handling and the cost of all other miscalculation, the cost subsidy addition and all miscalculation have presented Nigeria, the giant of Africa, cannot refine a liter of petrol as we speak. Is it not a shame that today, as you look at the nation Nigeria, the giant of Africa, that we cannot pride of one modular refinery is supplied with crude oil that it can produce? I heard a rumor on Saturday on a platform where we were chatting online, and somebody said that the crude oil of this nation have been used to borrow money for the next 1 or 2 years. I said it's not true. I am looking at the authorities to come and counter these rumors that the crude oil of this nation was not taken for loan. This precious time that the crude oil price has improved because of the war in Russia and Ukraine and the Hamas and Israeli conflict, which has presented the crude to be at a stable rate. And somebody is telling Nigeria, the giant of Africa, that the crude oil have been taken to take loan for 2 years. That is crazy. So how much more are we thinking about Africa when someone would take away the pride of the nation
Well,
in terms
like you
of
said,
unbelief,
it's a rumor.
rumor.
It's not confirmed.
It better be a rumor,
Right.
like I said, and I want that rumor to be exhausted. Because when we talk about Africa, we should stand strong to talk about those things that unite us as a nation, as a giant of Africa. When Nigerians succeed in terms of infrastructure, Africa have succeeded. When Nigeria succeed in terms of political stability and responsive of government into the issues that build a stronger nation, we are building a stronger Africa. So all this runs side by side. So Nigeria today is being looked at as a mother of the hens, and we should responsibly take up the fight of building a cohesive Africa. When you talk about African national integration and all that goes around it, we must take the center stage, because we will stand to benefit more. Even in Nigeria, we have the Innocent Motor, which is a local manufacturing vehicle. How much more has Nigeria and their government policies patronized our own? But I see some African countries on record which have had that bilateral arrangement and buying from Innocent vehicle. How much does it encourage other African markets to patronize their own? We are seeing the issues of Nigerian and the cement. When you go to Ghana, the same industry owners that produce cement in Nigeria have African countries where they operate. You find out that the same cement 50 kg is sold cheaper in other African neighbors where they are still the producers and manufacturers of cement. And here today, Nigerians have set up a wildfire in terms of price of cement and other commodities in Nigeria, and you think that we should go and sleep. It has caused a sleepless economic time for Africa.
Ambassador, let me bring you back to the main theme of the 37th summit itself, which had to do with education. The major theme there was building resilient education systems for development. It is also one of the key goals of Agenda 2063. Now, is it a coincidence that at this point in time that the AU is looking at how to build its education systems and build skills that are required for development in their various countries?
Thank you so much again. And I appreciate my co-discussant again for taking up this issue of Nigeria taking the center stage. I suppose that idea of taking the center stage is the equivalent of what we are talking about. That's leadership. Leadership in Africa at this point in its history means one thing and one thing alone. That thing is, who will provide that aggregate, powerful, credible organizational authority to take the rest of Africa and present them to the world as equal partners in global geopolitics and economics. To talk about education, remember one thing. That thing is that the pattern of relationship between Africa and the external world has always been that of you bring in raw materials exploited from the African continent, you take them to Europe or to some other metropolitan country, they produce finished products and send them back to Africa. And we consume them at probably 10, 20 times the costs or the price we got for the raw materials that left our continent. I had my colleague there enumerating the abundance of resources from solid minerals to liquid minerals to very strategic rare earth minerals that we produce in Africa. Take something like lithium, which in Nasarawa state here is mined, and most of it illegally, if any at all, is legally exported from Nigeria to these other countries. And they prepare these lithium batteries. Some last us for 6 months, 1 year, 10 years. Today I hear you can make lithium batteries that last 50 years. Imagine if we could do such things. How can you do them if you do not have education? In other words, how do you reverse the colonial pattern of trade, whereby Africa remains the supplier of raw materials, and these other countries today, including China and India, become the suppliers of finished goods and services? I think that's where education comes in as a critical factor for Africa to become a credible producer of goods and services that Africa itself needs to consume in a lot of quantities, as well as exports in also significant quantities in order to be a recognized competitor and participant, not just in global politics, attending conferences and things, but in the economics of the world, the central economic issues that concern the world, where Africa is at the margin. Now, as a foreign policy person, I will be thinking this way. If I was the Nigerian leader, my thinking will be this way. How do we in Africa judge assess our external development partners, we call them, from the United States to Europe to China to India to Russia, Brazil? They were, in fact, the litmus test for who is Africa's friend, in my view, should be which one or combination of these countries of origin support Africa's Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and its objectives. Any of these countries that support this, mind you, what they are supporting is, yes, Africa can now be a major producer of finished industrial goods, of technological products. In fact, this morning on the news, you saw a Nigerian minister boasting. A Nigerian minister was boasting, and they elicited laughter rather than credibility. He said Nigeria will soon overtake India as an exporter of high-tech personnel and high-tech products. And the question is this through prayers, or is it through magic, or is it through wishful thinking? There is one way. That way is the education route. I suppose that's what the African Union is talking about. But like we all know and have noted time and again, talk is cheap. Talk is very cheap. It does not amount to anything if you do not take it further than mere speech. Take Nigeria again, for example, because this is where we are. How much is Nigeria's budget for education? Vis-a-vis, well, education and health, they must go together because development is a function of a healthy mind in a healthy body. Even if one is educated, but you have a very weak health sector, health care facilities, you might get sick. And a highly intelligent, educated, skilled person who is sick is still as useless as the one who doesn't have those skills. So health and education go together in countries that plan growth and development, depending mostly on themselves. So what is Africa's aggregate budget for education? That is where the litmus test is. If Nigeria could begin to raise its educational budget beyond talking about scholarship for students, take a look at something like you have 5-point-something billion naira for students loan. Students, that's college, university education loans. You have a budget that says 5-point-something billion. And you have a provision of government for pilgrimages that run into 20-30 billion naira or something like that, or dollars. Does that prioritize education as the key to growth and development, as the key to relevance in global geopolitics and economics? I don't think so. So the AU can speak, but you know, it depends on the individual country. It depends specifically on the policies taken by each country to execute this umbrella recommendation that education should take a larger priority in the development agenda for African states. Nigeria, we hear, has over 20 million young people who should be in school, but who are out of school. Yet, when we make budgets, I do not see any specific provision made to attract and draw these children back into the education training programs.
Ambassador, flowing from that, do you believe that what we see year in, year out at the summits are just cheap talk? I mean, diplomatics and nothing more.
In fact, if it was diplomatics, it would be nice, in which case we'll say, but the thing is, you cannot blame the AU as an institution because it is doing its job. It's like those who blame the United Nations for not doing this and that and that. The strength, the power, the competence any international organization has to do anything is the aggregate power, the aggregate authority, the aggregate resources, provided it by the component units that make up that organization. So blaming the AU itself is not totally helpful, but actually holding the various heads of states and governments that make up the AU accountable for AU decisions and proclamations sounding like annual broken records. You say the same thing over and over, and at the end of the day, nothing is really different from what it was the previous year or the previous decade. So we know where to place the blames. If African politicians are more interested in self-preservation in power, which they call a preservation of democracy, I think that's the euphemism they use these days. When regimes wish to survive and even survive beyond their tenure, they say they are protecting democracy, and that's a recipe for chaos, which we are seeing in many of these African countries, including Senegal, that was a very stable country up to now trying to postpone elections and indirectly introduce. So these are the problems. The priority of African leadership on country-by-country basis is very crucial and important to achieving the continental prescriptions for our growth, development, and relevance in global geopolitics.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Well, let me bring that to you here, Mr. Okonkwo, and say he has spoken about the priorities of African countries. Yeah. And the theme for this year, which has to do with education and skills acquisition, which are required for development, which are required for trade, and which are required for the integrative process that we so much desire. What kind of education system do we need in each and every African country at this point in time to be able to compete globally?
Education is the bedrock of every development, call it in Africa or the Western world and all over the world. So it becomes very important for Africa to educate their own. When we talk about education, we're talking about giving value to education that are, in the real sense, provide knowledge, provide good training, provide empowerment, provide knowledge strength to be able to carry out the knowledge required to build Africa. If you look at Nigeria, for instance, our educational sector and the decay, you will remember between 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, we have the OAU, the University of Nigeria, the Ahmadu Bellos. You see foreign students from parts of Africa and outside Africa coming to study in Nigeria. Even in my time, 2005 here, in my school, Abia State University, I have 3 students from Central African Republic, and I have one, Mohete Pasialo Eda, from one African country around here, who have to leave her country to study in Abia State. paying the school fees and all that, because the standard of education provided by that institution was valuable to give them value to come here to Nigeria and study. One now will ask, what has happened to our educational system? The revered OAU today and all other institutions of learning that has produced the best of the best in mathematics and best in all that, best engineers, the Emagwales and all that in history. What have happened to our educational system that it has become what it is today? The question is same boiled down to our taking education very unserious and politicizing education. The fact that today, if you look at records, unless it has changed, that the scores to enter federal government colleges and pass score quotient, cutoff mark, has remained a product of different from the south, different from the north, and different from the west. And nobody say anything about that. That children are 10, sat for an examination, and this one scored 50, this one scored 60, and this one scored 70. And they said, because you are from this part of this thing, your cutoff point is 70. And because you're from this one, your cutoff point is 10. What kind of foundation have you laid? The professor you are producing from that place who scored 10 has lost the potential and capacity, academic intelligence quotients of capacity to compete with the developing educational standard than that who scored 70. But because of quotient and sharing and all that, regional and central and all that, have deprived that knowledge. But let me go straight to issues that are very important about our educational system. Our educational system decay has broken my heart severally. In fact, you will bear witness to seasons of strikes, that one will enter a course of 4 years and study it 9 years. And that 9 years, there's no consistency. A lawyer have mixed several courses and several things that should be participated to breed a lawyer that can stand out the test of time. Now, you look at in the international schools all over the world, Nigeria alone, being the giant of Africa, has the highest international student you can see. Name it all over, including in Africa, including in Niger, our neighbor. Because of what? Our educational system is not given priority. Our educational system is left to function by the will of God. While it is a product of a serious organizational input that the government should take our education serious, put funding as a priority. You watch the university union issues with the government over the time, which has gone many years. Most of the major things that they canvass is our educational infrastructure. What do we have? You find out today that most universities in Nigeria produce engineers that have not have access to the practical machines to do their practicals. Mm-hmm. So what will be the outcome of such engineer who watch it on the TV or who read it in books without being losing the thought and not and tightening them?
You have restricted your analysis to only Nigeria. Supposing other African countries are doing much better than Nigeria. Which is why I asked you the question. What kind of educational system we require?
Thank you. Forgive me for centralizing my analysis on Nigeria, because charity begins at home, and it pains me. I say my hearts have been broken severally, wanting and needing the government to be serious about our educational system, to train our own pilots, to train our own aeronautic engineers, to train our own lawyers and doctors and nurses that will stay.
Okay.
So in Africa today, you see that the same thing you are seeing in Nigeria are not far-fetched in other countries of Africa. It is something that today you find out that
Second call, I'm afraid we have to go now. Our time is fast spent. All of that. Yes. Ambassador, I want to thank you immensely for finding time to join us. I was going to ask you one last question, but our time is up. I was going to ask how responsive the AU itself has been over time in responding to developments on the continent, but that will be an issue for another day. Ambassador Humphrey Ojako, Nigeria's former permanent representative to the United Nations office in Geneva. He also served as Nigeria's ambassador to very many other countries and diplomatic postings around the world during his active years in service. Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we also had Professor Imam Mukhtar, Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the Muhiba Open University and Director Center for Middle East and North Africa Studies here in Abuja. Unfortunately, network did not allow him to continue with us. Thank you so much for your time. And Mr. Vitus Okonkwo, who is right here with me in the studio, is a governance and policy analyst. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.